So I'm really excited to bring you this interview with the CEO of MindsDB, Jorge Torres. Jorge and I talk about open source. We talk about enterprise artificial intelligence. We talk about RAG. We talk about a whole bunch of really cool stuff. So check out the interview right now. So we got connected, and I saw MindsDB. I do a lot of consulting on the side, and mostly for enterprise companies. And a lot of these companies are asking me, like, how do I apply AI to my business? Obviously, ChatGPT just as kind of an assistant is great, but I think one of the most valuable use cases that I've seen is being able to essentially ask questions about your entire knowledge base as an enterprise company. And so that's what MindsDB does. But I want to ask you, how did you arrive at this problem? Like, what did you identify? And then how did you look to approach solving it?
Yeah, that is a great question. So maybe I can walk you back into what we were inspired by and what we wanted to build when we started, and how that fits into the story of today. So are you into science fiction?
Absolutely. I think I've seen every sci-fi movie there is. Yes.
Yeah. So we big fans here as well. And we were reading this cultural series by Ian M. Banks. Player Games was the book that I started reading. And in this book, there are these very intelligent systems called minds, and they collaborate with biological intelligence to accomplish like crazy goals. And we felt that maybe the world will be great if humans had minds that they could collaborate with. And we felt that AI was only going to get better. Like machine learning was going to transform more into like applicable AI, and it was going to continue to improve. And we felt that maybe the consumer aspects of this were, although interesting for us, the enterprise, which we all depend on. Like at the end, we all consume products from companies. We all work for companies. We all make our living out of like enterprises. They could leverage this capability. So we felt at some point there's going to be enterprise AGI, and we wanted to be an important part of the solution. And when we thought of enterprise AGI, we felt that if you think about the definition of AGI, where you have like three major kind of milestones that they have to accomplish. One is human level cognition. The other one is the ability to learn. And the last one is having autonomy. Enterprise AGI seems to have like a narrower interpretation of that, which is autonomy at the end has to be control autonomy. You don't want something that is fully autonomous, just kind of like making all the decisions of a company, at least not in the foreseeable future. You want it to be a collaboration, and you want it to be constrained. So then you can focus a lot on can you accomplish human level cognition? Can you accomplish a system that can learn to solve problems? And to accomplish human level cognition, you have to do a few things. You have to first have systems that can understand their environment. And the environment of enterprises is all boiled down into data systems. Like everything that happens within the enterprise goes into like some sort of information system or data store of some like capacity. Like if you think of every application at the end has to store the data somewhere. And that's kind of like the perception layer for the enterprise. The second one is you need to be able to communicate with these things. And the way that people traditionally communicate with this are like query languages. It is a problem of like data being everywhere, so you can do it in a kind of like partition way. So we thought, okay, to solve this problem, it has to be in a federated way. And to actually do human level cognition, you have to do it in a way that the systems learn how to communicate in natural language. This capability we saw was going to improve over time. So we felt that at some point, if we build like a good connection tissue into like the information systems of the organization, eventually they will merge into, can you communicate to them in plain English? And now we are in that stage where it's true. Now, the following things is, can you ask these things to perform a task, and they can kind of stay focused on that task and solve it within the domains of their autonomy. And it felt that many of the level basic tasks that you want to do are discovery of data. You want to be able to find some information that exists somewhere within your data stores and use that information to make an action. And it is natural for humans to start there and then transform some of those questions or follow-up questions into some form of analytics that you want to do. That's kind of like the basic thing that you can do with a system that has some human-level cognitive capabilities over the entire data that you may have in an organization. And eventually, those systems will evolve to the point where you can say, okay, well, now that I've seen this data, I want to automate some part of the process or automate some workflows. And that's kind of like a lot of the things that people do with agents today. And nonetheless, all of those require to have like this layer that can talk with a user or a system, understand the requirement, and get the data that needs to happen. So that's kind of like where we are. And to get to the journey, we first build a distributed federated query engine. And then on top of that, we started building more of the cognitive capabilities that we felt were important to accomplish this task.
When a company approaches MindsDB to use you, what is the problem that either they're able to verbalize or maybe they aren't, but they kind of have this issue or this thing that they need to accomplish? What are they telling you when they first come to you? And then what are they discovering after they discover more of what Minds is able to do?
Yeah, so many of the companies suffer of this natural consequence of existing for some time. Like the more a company exists, the more data they collect. And this data sometimes is the same thing as not having data. And they also understand that this data could be a competitive advantage if it could be used and leveraged in ways that they can't necessarily today. So that is kind of like the common denominator. I feel like what happened in 2022 and 24 paved the way for most of the decision makers that were not necessarily technical to understand, oh, wow, this capability is probably ready for me to actually leverage it. Like no one before 2024 or even 2023 will think that a CEO will wake up and think like, oh, what's going on with my AI? But that's true to every single organization today. So where most organizations are in at this moment is, okay, AI is something that I can go into ChatGPT, log in, and I can play. How can I do that for me? How can I do that for not just me, but for every single person in my organization, for every single team? Now, today, a few years later, like since GPT 3.5 onwards, a lot of people are making this decision based on a framework of risk. So they have, of course, many considerations that they have to take into account. One is, do I build systems and do I make systems that are to improve the performance of my teams internally that has very little risk? Or do I make systems that are customer facing, and if something goes wrong, what will happen? So most of the organizations are a little bit hesitant to take the leap on that last part. But for the problems that are about optimizing workflows that exist today that could be highly optimized if people had better information every time they make a decision, then that's very appealing for people. And the reason why this is very appealing is because they understand right now that there are inefficiencies, and there are inefficiencies that in theory they could be solving. And many of these inefficiencies have to do with, I know that the answer to my question is somewhere in there. And if I could find it, then I could perform my task without having to reinvent the wheel every single time that I do it. And the alternative to not having AI is just that you don't find the information. And we all experience this even at like, if I were to look into my email, for example, and ask it a question like, hey, what are the conversations that I had with Matthew over the past 6 months that have to do with like the interview? I can't, like Gmail just doesn't give me that. Like it is impossible to find information. And you're talking about like Gmail, which is like a data company. Now you can imagine how it is for like every single organization that doesn't have this capability. So all of a sudden, the possibility of being able to bubble this information and bubble it from the point of view of it can be natural for users to ask these questions and get this data, it's very appealing. And that's where most of the market is today for us.
Yeah, I see. I'm going to oversimplify it greatly, but like the chat with your docs, knowledge, context, signal, whatever you want to call it. That was really the most impressive first real world use case that I saw with AI. And so Minds essentially does that, but on steroids, supercharged for large organizations, huge data sets. Where do you see a real world AI, actual applicable AI for the enterprise going in the mid and the long run? So if we have chat with your docs now, and it doesn't need to be specific to Minds, but what should company leaders start to think about with regards to solutions that might be coming in the next 2 to 3 years and then 5 to 10 years to help them just be more productive, be more efficient, whatever that metric they're aiming for is?
Yeah, and I think that many of these intuitions are guided by how people work today with other humans. But then when there's like a person, they're limited by how much data they can process at a given time. So one good example of this is you clearly saw like, okay, well, chat with your documents. Most of the company's organizations or most of the company's data is not just in documents. It lives on, let's say you have Salesforce, so you have like some data in Salesforce, you have some data on your emails, you have some data on your state of record, your ERPs. Like if you think about it, they have so many systems. So being able to do that across the board is like the next kind of type of solution that people want, and we enable to a great extent that. But once you enable this capability, it is phenomenal to see how if you enable people with the capability to find the data they want, it is natural for them to then ask questions that involve transforming that data into information that they need for the problem that they need to ask. So this is now, the data doesn't exist in that shape, but you're asking the systems to transform it in a way that is useful for your problem. So this is kind of like crossing the line from search and discovery to analytics. Traditionally, analytics was solved with like BI tools and all this tooling that was invented as a solution for kind of like bubbling this information, but still has many problems. Like in order for you to create a dashboard, you need to kind of be versatile in SQL. And even if you build like many dashboards, it becomes also a problem of finding the dashboard that has the information that you actually want. And then if you optimize for fewer dashboards, there's no way that you can cut all the information that you need in one single way. So conversational systems change the game dramatically because it starts with like, first let me find the data I want, and then let me transform this data in a way that is useful for my use case. And that's specific to the question that each individual may have at the time. So the next evolution, and that we're seeing today and we'll continue to see, is the merger between search and analytics from the conversational point of view. And if you keep on playing this line of thought, usually what happens to a lot of people is like, okay, well, I found the data. I don't want to do this all the time. Like, I don't want to be asking every single morning, what is this? Like you start wanting the system to automate things for you. So you want to start setting those instructions in a more conversational way. And I think that's an endeavor that some organizations are thinking today. But the way that we see it is that if you enable one capability, that in itself unlocks a demand for another capability, because that's the way that we humans have been doing things for a while. And all the way to, like, how can you automate some of the tasks that people do so you don't have to do them all the time? Then it translates into how do you optimize the decisions that are made on those tasks? Like, how can you, for example, introduce things that before were the holy grail of machine learning, et cetera, where like, okay, before you make the decision, forecast the possible outcomes and make sure that you make a decision based on, some likelihood that is based on the data that exists, not on some intuition.
So you said something interesting. Companies have all of this data, and one part of it is retrieving the data, and then it's manipulating the data as you see fit. I want to ask you something, because this is something I've been thinking about a long time, or a lot recently, I should say. There's this notion of just-in-time UI, and it kind of feels like MindsDB is doing that today, and then also very well positioned to do that even more so in the future. So when either as a consumer or an enterprise company, you're thinking about what needs to be delivered to that person in that moment. And so you have systems of record like Salesforce, like HubSpot. And again, super oversimplification, but essentially it's a UI layer on top of a database, right? And so if you think about it like that, in the future, if you can just ask an agent through Minds to pull the data and present it to me or you in a specific way, where do the Salesforces of the world or the HubSpots of the world, what do they do? Where do they lie in this stack? And I'm going to ask you a subsequent question after that, but let's start there. Like, what this notion of just-in-time UI, where do all these other system of record interfaces belong in that stack in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that the way that this will likely evolve, in my opinion, is this just-in-time UIs will still require like some widgets for you to interact with whatever information you need at the moment in the most articulate way. So many times, like question there, question back is not the best way for you to provide information. Sometimes you want to like click a few things and then that's it. So many of the systems will evolve into you have a question, then the answer may be you get a table and you get to explore the table like it was Excel. And some of these things you're like creating a ticket, and you may not want to make all the elements of this conversational, even though you may have like a copilot next to it that will help you populate most of the information that you need. But what will happen is that this kind of like systems that today we understand as like the SaaS applications will transform into AI applications, and then there will be like some centralized AI platforms that allow you to kind of pull these widgets, ideally in a way that is kind of like one decentralized standard that you can kind of like ensure that every player gets to do it in a similar way, kind of like the way that it happened on the web. HTTP kind of made that possible. So similarly, I think that it will evolve in that direction. And therefore, each of the players gets to understand truly the domain and how is it that this interface continues to be very, very smart, but also not tedious. And what you can do is reduce the amount of steps. And for them, the goal is that they are continuing to be the state of record. Like when it comes to customers, they're going to be highly incentivized to like retain that data and also enrich it with data that may be useful for you. And what will be the responsibility for systems outside of that is to ensure that you can deal with like the reality that data will continue to be federated. And if you want to build a solution that is holistic, it will have to be able to talk to all the systems and guarantee that you interact with them through like, again, like a very simple UI that gets to provide complexity as the user demands it, but continues to be like a single entry point. Like the truth of that is that even today, if you look at ChatGPT, like people start like asking questions, all of a sudden start creating demands for like, okay, search can be something similar to this. And it just changed the way that people thought of search. Yet right now they're still figuring out what is the best way to show the results in a way that are actionable. So that's the way that I think it will evolve. It will be more like widgets that will get brought into you, made by those providers of the holders of the state of record or that information. And then you will continue to interact with those systems, and therefore they will be highly incentivized to provide the best experiences. But now they will be conversational centric.
Okay, yeah, I keep going back and forth on whether I believe there is a place for those types of companies in the distant future. 10 years from now. If everything can be just predicted, what you need in that moment proactively, it's hard for me to really envision where an interface company would be. But I want to actually change topics. I want to, one of the reasons I was actually really excited to talk to you today and really glad that we met to begin with is because you have an awesome open source version and kind of you've contributed a lot to the open source side of things. So I want to ask you first, tell me about the open source MindsDB. What's the difference between that and your enterprise version? And then I want to talk a little bit about the business of having, you're a for-profit company, but you also have this open source arm. So talk to me a little bit about what is the open source version right now?
Yeah. So have you heard of the Ulrich Gall principles of systems complexity? probably no one has heard about this, but
No.
it has a law that says that it is impossible to make a very complicated system from scratch unless you start from a very simple system. And this law is that if you try to like engineer a system like end to end that is very complex, you're likely going to end up with a system that doesn't solve the problem, and you're going to spend the rest of your life kind of patching that system to get to the complexity that you want. If you think of something like AGI or enterprise AGI, etc., it will be almost one-to-one, in our opinion, a mistake if you try to build a system that has all the capabilities that you think a system like that should have. And therefore, you want to start with what is the simplest part of a problem that you can solve, and then build upon that. In our mind, the simplest but most important part of the problem to start with was being able to talk to all kinds of data. And we felt that was the fundamental part of our thesis was data in enterprises lives in so many different places. And if you cannot tap into this data, all what you have is generic AI. You don't have like AI that is for that enterprise. So we built this federated query engine with the principles of it has to be AI-centric. It will allow anything that is AI or machine learning to talk to this data. And given that we wanted to understand if we were going in the right direction, we decided to open source it. And for us, open source is this beautiful way of creating software in which you can even start by putting a README with like, this is my idea. And you will find individuals that will be like, this is interesting. Why don't you do it this way? Or I tried it and it actually sucks. And they don't have any hesitation, and you don't owe them anything. They don't owe anything back to you. So when they tell you something is because there is no like common interest in trying to make something that sounds cool work. And we couldn't exist without that. So today, if you ask me, I don't know how people build software that is not open source. It's just like so hard for me to think about you build something and then you convince someone that doesn't get to reward in any other way than just kind of like, I'm going to try your product. When it's open source, at least they feel like they belong, because they really do belong to the solution. But when you're building on a vacuum, I don't really know how is it that you find people to try your product when it's imperfect. It really means that you understand exactly the market very, very well, and the solution is kind of already predetermined.
What? But if I can interrupt for 1 second, Jorge, why do you think? And maybe this is just my perception, but why do you think AI companies in particular have been so open and willing to have an open source version of their products? Is it AI in particular? Have I just not noticed other industries open sourcing as frequently as AI? What are your thoughts there?
I think that since AI is incomplete, it's very humbling to kind of like say, hey, this is my approach and try it. I mean, I don't know if this is the best solution, but it is one solution. And I think that is what is appealing to the AI community. Is like, man, this solution will continue to improve and you can try it. And even more, you can give feedback. And if you want to, you can even help me fix it. And that's beautiful. Other industries have problems that now are a little bit more robust. But in times, they weren't. For example, when people were creating databases, people were like, well, there's the Oracle way, but there might be other ways. For example, I guess from Mongo, there's like, maybe for the web, it's better to store information in JSON. And I don't know really if this is going to be the best solution, but why don't you try it? And I think that led to Mongo being what Mongo is. When the problem is already well defined, then you actually want a solution that just kind of works. For example, when Snowflake came to play, they were like, data warehousing. I mean, you can try to go the open source way, but what people want is to be able to search this information really fast. So long the solution is faster than what you find, then you can do it. So I think that when the market is already perfectioned, then it lends itself for less open source. But when you're figuring things out, then it's a good alternative. Another one is where you have a player that is the only player in the market for a very, very important solution, and then you feel that unless there is competition, it's not going to land well. Operating systems were one of those. Like you had like only closed source operating systems, and the guys from the BSD, like FreeBSD, and then Linux, etc. They were like, well, there needs to be an alternative because you cannot operate a computer with an operating system. So when that happens, then also there's an open source movement, which you saw with like OpenAI and what the guys from Facebook did, which was beautiful, and Mistral, etc. Otherwise, it would be too scary to live in a world where
OpenAI for in the past, not so much currently.
Or currently, they were like the closed player, and some people thought this is such an incredible capability. It just kind of sucks that there's not a way for the general public to see what's going on and to see where it's going to land and to kind of get a say on how the systems are built, to participate on it. And luckily, the market kind of like, again, showed that when that happens, the open source community just kind of like someone is going to say, well, let me build it and kind of give it away so I can leverage many more things from the open source. Like, let me figure out how this is going to play. And for Facebook, it's playing out pretty well. They're building all this tooling around the Llama models that now they're using for Meta. So,
and then their ecosystem becomes the standard. Yeah, I like it. I really, obviously, I've said it a million times on the channel. I really appreciate everything Meta is doing. Obviously, I also appreciate what Minds is doing because, open source, the ability to download something, play around with it, have a bunch of eyeballs on it. It just hardens the security. It evolves the product much more quickly. I'm a big fan, and it's interesting. I'll share something I don't think I've mentioned on the channel. I didn't really understand open source for a very long time. I had formerly created a SaaS company. I worked for closed source companies. It was just never a thing we talked about. And then AI, as I said, it was kind of just the standard, it seemed. And I really liked it. Then I started understanding better and trying to figure out, okay, in what ways does open source benefit everybody? And I have a much better understanding now. So I find that interesting.
Yeah. And then the question that you had following was, okay, how do you make a business out of that, right?
Yeah, because a lot of founders are probably starting companies and thinking, well, am I going to get investment if I give it away for free? And is there a business model to give it away for free? I am absolutely in love with the kind of give away the core tech for free and then offer all of the services on top of it. But I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So let's start with like the question of the founders that are kind of like concerned about it. I think that the US is different from other places. So if you're in the US, maybe this applies. I don't know how that applies elsewhere. I think that the US is this culture of like, fuck yeah. Like you say, I'm gonna try to do this crazy thing, and there's gonna be someone that says, yeah, fuck yeah, let's do it. And nowhere else in the world that I've been, you have that feeling of like, it doesn't matter how crazy it is, someone is you're going to find someone. And in that same kind of like line of thought, someone said, I'm going to create a software and it's going to be like open and people can see. And eventually the ecosystem evolved into like a lot of people saying, yeah, okay, let's do it. After many years of that happening, you have a very established ecosystem that understands open source pretty well. So you shouldn't be concerned about it. Actually, if you have open source, it makes your life easier because you can go and see what are the companies that were open source and they had investors, and those are the investors you want to talk to. And they understand this game so well that they know, okay, first you need to build a community, then your community needs to grow. Eventually you will have like what is like product community fit. And once you have that, then you're going to understand how to build an enterprise kind of like vector to your company. But the beautiful part of that as well is that you will not be the first one walking that journey. You will have so many other companies that have figured it out. So all you have to do is like, which one of those has walked a similar walk than the one I've walked, and the one that I would like to be the next 3 or 4 steps. So, for example, we know that in the open source world, you can build something that enterprises can use. And as a matter of fact, like MindsDB has hundreds of thousands of deployments, but once you try to build the systems and put them in production, there are going to be needs that enterprises have. And this is true not just to MindsDB. Like anything that has to do with security, no one wants to touch a security stack of any product. Like you rather buy it than build it because it is so critical that you don't want like, I don't know, Jorge middle of the night, had a beer and made a code mistake. Like you want this to be like already kind of like curated and people had validated that this thing works. So when you're saying I have an enterprise offering of the security system or like the secret management system, all of those things are kind of security constraints of what you're building. If you're promising that you have something that checks all the boxes, then no one wants to build it and they're willing to pay for that. When it comes to observability, you can have a system that spits log into like a file system, and that's okay for you to kind of like get the things running. But if you really want to know what happens when something goes wrong, especially if you have like something in production, no one wants to touch that. It's boring to build. And as an enterprise, you don't want to be hiring engineers to build things that you can buy. Like the end is that decision. Like if an engineer costs money, if you can buy it, then so that's the second pillar. And then the other one is anything that has to do with scalability and production. You can get to build software that works for a lot of people, and then they can figure out how to scale it. But if you have a solution that scales it for them off the bat, then people also don't want to build it. And I think that I'm not inventing that. Like you can see that the same thing happened with Databricks and Mongo and all the other ones. They kind of fall into like the same kind of features. So the playbook is already there. Trying to invent a new way to do it is not the way that we wanted to pursue building an open source software. Is more like we want to build something that delivers a lot of value to a lot of people. And then we want to find a model of making money around that, which is going to be a function of an exchange of value. And the more value we give in the open source, the more people will benefit from it. And then the more people are kind of like seriously using it are going to also find important to have a value exchange for those features that they want to build themselves.
Yeah, I remember at my previous company, like I still think about this all the time. One of the biggest learnings was the enterprise companies. I guess the difference between the enterprise companies and kind of the standard user of our software, those enterprise companies were looking not necessarily to pay a lot of money for the core product or service. It was all of the peripheral services around it that enterprise companies have grown to not only expect, but to require. And you mentioned it, security and scalability, observability. Those are the things that are kind of the same regardless of what product or service you're looking at. So if you get really good at this core technology, and then you build all of these enterprise features, functionalities around it, that's what enterprise buys. And it's not like they're decoupled completely, to be clear. Security and scalability, these things are coupled closely with the core product. So you have a really good view and a very strong opinion on how they should be built. And so anyways, that is why an enterprise company will pay 10, 100, 1,000 times more than a standard, small business, medium business user.
100%. And to your point, like no one will know better than you at implementing this for the product. So they will trust you more than they will trust any developers that you can even hire. And this is even more true if you think of the salaries of engineers worldwide. Like before COVID, maybe like there was a distribution, but now you have people all over the world like claiming US salaries. So the cost of developing software, like high quality software for like those features that are like enterprise features, require like highly skilled engineers. And now you're talking about like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So if your solution is less than that, then you're already kind of like fitting within the math equation of like, well, I must deliver for this solution of either scalability or security, etc. But I'm not going to pay for someone making mistakes when already someone knows how to do it.
So, we talked about open source and how getting more eyeballs on something hardens a system. But I actually want to talk about something related, which is hallucinations. AI still subject to hallucinations. It's a feature, not a bug. That's probably going to be the way it is for a while. You can build systems around it to help with hallucinations. How has MindsDB, when you're working with an enterprise company where a single mistake can be mission critical to them, how are you thinking about hallucinations, preventing hallucinations, reporting on them? Yeah, tell me how you think about it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think that to your point, it's not a bug, a feature. Like we humans, we hallucinate the whole time. Like if you ask someone 10 times the same question, they're likely going to give you a variation of that. So, and many times innovation is a product of human hallucination. But
Well
that being
said.
said, for the enterprise, it all has to do with what is the risk of this AI system making a mistake versus what I have right now. So going back to where the market is at today, if the problem that you're trying to solve is like finding data, without AI, you're kind of like bound to keyword matching. And with AI now, you can have the capability of understanding the true meaning of the question and then understanding the meaning of the information that exists. And then the worst thing that can happen is that you're still going to find some results and they may not be the top 20 results. Let's say you miss one or two, but now you're finding stuff that before you couldn't. So in that, the solution with AI still is significantly better than not having AI. You know, it's kind of like having self-driving cars where everyone is an awful driver. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to Colombia, but I wish at some point, I'm from Colombia. I wish at some point people will, you know, the trade-off of self-driving will be much better there than not. And I think that the same thing applies to enterprises. So when the risk is measured on what is the trade-off and the alternative solution is significantly worse, then you still are going to be well off, especially when you have a human that is going to receive this information and is going to be the one accountable. So when someone is finding information, it still is their job to kind of like, you know, go and verify, etc. It starts to get trickier when you're in the process of distilling that information and making an informed decision and automating that process. Then you want to reduce the scope of mistakes. And that will have to do with like how many, you know, systems you build around it to guarantee that is enforced. And people are working very hard on solving that. Eventually they will crack that. But it is always an appetite of risk. And in so many cases, sometimes, even if it makes mistakes, it's still better than not. Then the question is more like who's accountable for the mistake. You're doing customer service and I tell you.
Oh, sorry. Can you highlight maybe one technique that you've found has worked well for reducing hallucinations?
So I think that when you retrieve evidence, it's like Mole's RAG systems have like shown to be a great way for it because you're retrieving the evidence that you want, and then all of what you're asking at the end is like some form of like summarization of what you want to get. But these LMs are actually not that bad at doing this. Now, many problems there actually are more into like the information that you're providing is contradictory. Or the information that you're providing, you're not putting in the right order. So whatever is summarizing is not the most relevant information, or it's not kind of like, it's not put into the system is not built in the right way. But if you guarantee that the information that you're providing to the LLM is enough for it to generate an answer, I think that's likely to be the best technique so far that people have to reduce hallucination. And again, if you can make it so that the response is just always grounded to like some evidence, so it can point down into like, okay, based on reference, this is the answer, etc., then people can always validate that is the case. I think that the systems again fail when, for example, you may want to find some information, but you also want to summarize the response. And in order for you to do that, the answer is like split across like, I don't know, hundreds of different documents, and the information for you to kind of deduct what it has to be, it has to kind of be put in a chronological way so that it can understand really how that changes. Like if you want to talk about sales in the past 12 months, you really need to bring sales over the past 12 months. A lot of these operations are more like transformations that you need to do rather than passing this to the LLM. And then after you do these transformations, then you can actually give it to the LLM so it can give you a summary.
Got it. Well, Jorge, thank you very much for chatting with me today. If people want to check out MindsDB, it's mindsdb.com. I'll drop all of the links down below. Jorge, if people want to find you directly, what's the best way?
Yeah, Slack. I'm always there. So if you go to mindsdb.com, there's a Slack button, and it's the easiest way to. I always 24/7 pretty much. So you can find me there.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you again. Appreciate it. I'll drop the GitHub repo down below. I'll drop MindsDB's URL down below. I'll drop the Slack also down below. Everything will be there. Thank you again, Jorge. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Matthew. And the pleasure is mine and an honor as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.